Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to Stories That Matter, where real life meets unforgettable moments that'll stick with you long after you close this tab. I'm about to share something that happened to me just last week, and honestly, I'm still processing it. Sometimes you think you're just going to fix someone's pool filter. You end up walking away with a completely different perspective on what it means to truly connect with another human being. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name's Alex, and I've been cleaning and fixing pools for about 8 years now. I know what you're thinking, pool guy. Probably just skims leaves and adds chlorine, right? Wrong. I'm the guy people call when their expensive filtration system decides to throw a tantrum, when their pump sounds like a dying whale, or when their pool water looks more like swamp soup than something you'd want to swim in. I've got a van packed with every tool, part, and chemical you can imagine. Plus a few tricks I've picked up from years of dealing with equipment that seems designed to break down at the worst possible moments. Most people see pool maintenance as this simple, almost mindless job, but let me tell you something, there's real skill involved. Understanding water chemistry, diagnosing mechanical problems, working with electrical systems around water. Dealing with customers who think their green algae bloom happened overnight when it's been building for weeks. Every pool tells a story. Some are neglected, some are obsessively maintained, and some are loved gathering places where families create memories. I've learned to read these stories in the pH levels, the condition of the equipment, and the way owners talk about their backyard oasis. I drive a beat-up white van that's seen better days, but it's reliable and holds everything I need. The sides are covered with magnetic signs that say crystal clear pool service in blue letters that are starting to fade from too much sun exposure. Inside, it's organized chaos, boxes of test strips, jugs of chemicals, replacement parts, sorted by size and frequency of use, and my toolbox that's been with me since day one. That toolbox has character, I'll give it that. Some of the tools are older than my career, handed down from the guy who taught me the trade, while others are brand new because technology keeps evolving in ways that make the job both easier and more complicated. The work keeps me moving around different neighborhoods, from modest tract homes with above-ground pools to sprawling estates with infinity pools that cost more than most people's houses. I've worked on pools where Hollywood celebrities float around, and I've worked on pools where kids are learning to swim for the first time with inflatable arm floaties and nervous parents hovering nearby. Every job is different. Every customer has their own story. And somehow, I've become this informal therapist who happens to carry pool chemicals instead of tissues. People talk to me while I work. Maybe it's because I'm focused on their equipment, instead of making eye contact. Or maybe it's because there's something about being around water that makes people reflective. I've heard confessions, celebrations, worries about kids going off to college, excitement about retirements, fears about health scares, and dreams about travel plans. Pool maintenance might pay the bills, but the real reward is these unexpected human connections that happen when someone trusts you enough to share what's really going on in their life. Tuesday morning started like any other. I had 5 scheduled stops, beginning with Linda Morrison's place on Maple Street. I'd been servicing her pool for about 3 months now, ever since her previous pool guy retired and left town. Linda's pool wasn't anything fancy, a standard rectangular, ground with basic equipment, but it had been giving her trouble lately. Filter system kept clogging. The circulation seemed sluggish, and despite my regular visits, something wasn't quite right with the whole setup. Maple Street sits in one of those established neighborhoods where the trees are mature enough to provide real shade. The sidewalks have character cracks from root systems that refuse to be contained, and most of the houses were built in an era when people cared about front porches and backyard privacy. Linda's house fit right in, a single-story ranch with cream-colored siding, dark green shutters, and a front yard that showed someone cared about curb appeal without being obsessive. About it, the driveway had a few oil stains and some cracks, but it was clean and welcoming. I pulled into her driveway around 9:30, earlier than my usual arrival time. But I wanted to tackle her filter problem when I was fresh, and had plenty of time to really dig into whatever was causing the issues. Linda had mentioned during My last visit that she was hosting a pool party for her daughter Emma's 16th birthday that weekend. And the last thing I wanted was for her to deal with cloudy water or poor circulation. When she had teenagers planning to spend the entire day swimming. The backyard gate was unlocked, as usual. Linda had given me permission to come and go as needed, which made my job much easier than dealing with customers who wanted to supervise every move. I liked that level of trust. It meant she saw me as a professional rather than just some guy with chemicals who might mess something up. The backyard was peaceful that morning, soft sunlight filtering through the oak tree that dominated one corner and birds chirping in the neighbor's garden. Linda's pool was about 20 by 40 feet, surrounded by concrete decking that had been recently pressure washed. The water looked clear from the surface, but I could tell from the way the skimmer was working that circulation was definitely compromised. Pool equipment doesn't lie when something's wrong. There are always signs if you know what to look for. The filter pressure gauge was reading higher than it should, which typically means the filter needs cleaning, or there's a blockage somewhere in the system. I set up my testing kit on the patio table and started my usual routine. Water chemistry first, pH, chlorine levels, alkalinity, hardness. Everything checked out fine, which confirmed that the problem was mechanical rather than chemical. I examined the skimmer baskets and found them reasonably clean. The pool sweep was moving around properly, so that wasn't the issue either. That left the main filter system, which meant I'd need to shut down the pump and take apart the filter housing to see what was going on inside. The pump and filter equipment sat in a small fenced area beside the pool, tucked behind some landscaping. That kept it hidden but accessible. Linda had done a nice job making the utilitarian equipment blend into the overall backyard design. As I opened the gate to the equipment area, I heard the sliding door from the house open behind me. "Morning, Alex." Linda's voice carried that warm, friendly tone that had made her one of my favorite customers from the beginning. She was the kind of person who remembered details about your life, asked genuine questions, and treated service providers like actual human beings rather than invisible workers who just happened to show up in her backyard. I turned around too. See her walking across the deck, carrying a large mug of coffee and wearing a light blue sundress that suggested she didn't have to rush off to an office somewhere. Linda was 45, though she looked younger, with shoulder-length brown hair that caught golden highlights in the morning sun, and an easy smile that made you feel like you'd been friends for years rather than just a few months. She had this natural confidence that wasn't showy or intimidating, just comfortable in her own skin in a way that seemed rare these days. "Good morning, Linda," I replied, pulling my tools out of the van. "Perfect timing. I was just about to dig into your filter situation."
How's the water been looking since my last visit?
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. She walked closer, sipping her coffee thoughtfully. Better than before, but I can still tell something's not quite right. The jets don't seem as strong as they should be, and yesterday I noticed some debris settling on the bottom that usually gets picked up by the circulation. Ma's been asking every day if the pool will be ready for her party, and honestly, I'm starting to worry. I nodded, understanding the pressure. Teenage pool parties are serious business, and a disappointed 16-year-old is not something any parent wants to deal with. "Don't worry, we'll get this figured out. I'm thinking there's probably a blockage in the filter housing, or possibly some buildup in the plumbing lines. Nothing that can't be fixed, but I want to take my time and really solve the problem instead of just treating the symptoms." Linda's face relaxed visibly. "That's exactly what I was hoping you'd say. The last pool guy would just add more chemicals and tell me to run the system longer, but it never really addressed whatever was actually wrong. Take all the time you need. I'll be inside working, but holler if you need anything." As she headed back toward the house, I started shutting down the pool system and gathering the tools I'd need to disassemble the filter housing. This was the kind of diagnostic work I actually enjoyed, like being a detective where the clues were water pressure, flow rates, and the condition of various mechanical components. Every problem had a logical solution if you approached it systematically and didn't rush through the process. The filter housing came apart easily enough, and immediately I could see the issue. The filter cartridges were clogged beyond what regular cleaning could address. But more importantly, there was a significant amount of calcium buildup on the housing walls and internal components. This wasn't something that happened overnight. It was the result of months or maybe years of water chemistry, imbalances that had gradually created mineral deposits throughout the filtration system. Cleaning this properly would take most of the morning. I'd need to remove all the cartridges, soak them in a specialized cleaning solution, scrape and brush the calcium deposits from the housing, check all the seals and gaskets, and then reassemble. Everything with careful attention to proper alignment and pressure settings. It was detailed work, but satisfying in the way that any skilled repair job can be when you know you're actually solving the underlying problem. About an hour into the project, Linda appeared again, this time carrying a glass of ice water and looking curious about my progress. I was elbow deep in the filter housing, scrubbing away years of mineral buildup with a specialized brush. It probably looked like I was performing surgery on pool equipment. "Wow, that looks intensive," she said, setting the water glass on. "Nearby ledge. Finding what you expected." I straightened up, wiping my hands on a rag. "Actually finding more than I expected, but in a good way. Your filter cartridges were completely clogged, and there's significant calcium buildup throughout the housing. The good news is that once I clean all this out and get everything reassembled properly, your circulation should be better than it's been in years. The bad news is that this kind of buildup suggests your water chemistry has been off for quite a while, probably long before I started servicing the pool." Linda nodded thoughtfully. "That makes sense. The previous pool guy never really explained anything or showed me what he was finding. I just trusted that he knew what he was doing, but looking back, I don't think the pool ever worked as well as it should have. I'm learning that there's a lot more to pool maintenance than I realized." As I went back to scrubbing the filter housing, Linda settled into a nearby patio chair, apparently in no hurry to go back inside. It wasn't unusual for customers to hang around while I worked, especially when the repair involved something more complex than routine cleaning. Some people were genuinely curious about how their pool equipment functioned, while others just seemed to enjoy having someone to talk to during their day. "Can I ask you something, Alex?" Linda's voice had shifted to a more serious tone that made me look up from my work. "Of course," I said, continuing to scrub, but giving her my attention. She was quiet for a moment, staring at the pool water with an expression I couldn't quite read. "How long have you been doing this kind of work?" "About 8 years now," I replied. "Started right after I got out of the military. Needed something that kept me outdoors, working with my hands, but also let me run my own schedule." "Why do you ask?" Linda smiled, but it was thoughtful rather than cheerful. "I've been watching you work these past few months, and there's something different about how you approach things. You actually care about solving problems rather than just going through the motions. It's refreshing. But it also makes me realize how many areas of my life I've been accepting good enough instead of looking for real solutions." I was in the middle of explaining the difference between calcium buildup and regular debris when Linda suddenly went quiet. Not the comfortable quiet of someone listening, but the heavy quiet that happens right before someone says something that changes everything. I kept working, giving her space to gather whatever thoughts were forming behind those contemplative eyes. The filter cartridge I was cleaning slipped from my hands and clattered against the concrete, breaking the silence. As I bent to pick it up, Linda's voice cut through the morning air with words I never saw coming. "At 45, I finally know what love should feel like." I froze halfway to standing up, the dripping filter cartridge in my hands, water pooling. "At my feet? Did I hear that right?" My brain scrambled to process what she'd just said and why she'd said it to me. Her pool guy, while I was elbow deep in calcium deposits and wearing a shirt that smelled like chlorine and honest work. I straightened up slowly, setting the cartridge on the equipment ledge. I was trying to figure out if this was the kind of moment where I should respond or pretend I hadn't heard anything. Linda was looking directly at me now, her expression serious, but not uncomfortable, like she'd just shared the weather forecast instead of something deeply personal. "I'm sorry," I said carefully, wiping my hands on a rag that was already beyond saving. "Did you just say what I think you said?" Linda nodded, taking a sip of her coffee with the kind of calm that suggested this wasn't an accidental overshare. I did, and I meant it. At 45, I finally understand what love should actually feel like, and it's nothing like what I spent 20 years thinking it was. The honesty in her voice hit me like a splash of cold pool water. This wasn't someone having a breakdown or looking for attention. This was someone who'd arrived at a profound realization and needed to speak it into existence, even if the only audience was a guy covered in filter grime. Before I could figure out how to respond, the sound of a lawnmower starting up next door saved me from having to come up with something meaningful to say. Robert Chen, Linda's neighbor, appeared over the fence line, waving a friendly hand in our direction. Robert was retired military like me, though he'd put in his full 20 years before starting a second career in real estate. We'd struck up conversations during my previous visits, bonding over shared experiences with military bureaucracy and the challenge of transitioning to civilian work. "Morning, Alex." "Linda," Robert called out over the mower noise. "That filter giving you more trouble?" "Just the usual calcium buildup," I called back, grateful for the interruption that gave me time to process what Linda had shared. Nothing a little elbow grease won't solve. Robert shut off the mower and walked closer to the fence. I asked, "What kind of buildup you're dealing with?" "My pool guy keeps telling me everything's fine, but my jets seem weaker than they used to be." I was about to launch into an explanation of mineral deposits and circulation problems when Linda stood up from her chair, walking over to join our conversation. There was something different about her posture. More confident than I'd seen before, like saying those words out loud had shifted something fundamental inside her. "Robert, when was the last time your pool guy actually showed you what he was doing?" Linda asked. Really explained the problems he was finding and how he was fixing them. Robert scratched his head, considering the question. I can't remember him ever doing that. Just shows up, does whatever he does, hands me a bill, and leaves. I assumed that was normal. Linda glanced at me, then back at Robert. That's exactly what I used to think too. But watching Alex work these past few months, I've realized there's a huge difference between someone who's just going through the motions and someone who actually cares about solving the real problem. The conversation was taking an interesting turn, and I found myself caught between wanting to focus on the technical aspects of pool maintenance and trying to understand the deeper message Linda seemed to be conveying. Was she talking about pool service, or was this connected to her earlier comment about love? "The thing is," Linda continued, settling into a rhythm that suggested she'd been thinking about this for a while, "most of us accept mediocre service because we don't know what good service actually looks like. We get used to problems that never quite get solved, solutions that only work temporarily, and people who show up but don't really see us." Robert nodded slowly. "That's an interesting way to put it. Are we still talking about pool maintenance?" Linda laughed, but it wasn't entirely lighthearted. Pool maintenance, relationships, friendships, even the way we treat ourselves. How many areas of our lives are we settling for good enough when we deserve so much better? I had stopped pretending to work on the filter and was now openly listening to this conversation that had somehow evolved from calcium buildup to life philosophy. There was something in Linda's voice that suggested she was working through ideas that had been building for longer than just this morning. I spent most of my adult life in a marriage where I thought love meant tolerating problems that never got fixed. Linda said, her voice steady but weighted with years of experience. My ex-husband was like that previous pool guy he'd show up, do the bare minimum, and expect me to be grateful for the effort. I thought that was normal because I didn't know what actual partnership looked like. The honesty was startling. Not because it was inappropriate, but because it was so genuine, in a world where most conversations stay safely on the surface. Robert had stopped fidgeting with his fence gate and was giving Linda his full attention. Even the neighbor's dog had gone quiet, as if sensing that something important was being shared. "When did you figure it out?" Robert asked gently. Linda gestured toward me, then seemed to catch herself. Watching Alex work made me realize what it looks like when someone actually cares about doing things right. He doesn't just treat symptoms. He finds the real problem and fixes it properly. He explains what he's doing, respects my time and my property, and genuinely wants my pool to work the way it's supposed to work. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, uncomfortable with being used as an example, but also moved by the unexpected recognition. Most customers barely acknowledge the difference between adequate and excellent service. So having someone notice the care I put into my work meant more than I would have expected. And that made me realize, Linda continued, that I've never had a relationship, romantic or otherwise, where someone approached problems the way Alex approaches pool maintenance, with genuine interest in finding solutions, respect for the complexity involved, and commitment to doing things right even when it takes more time and effort. Robert leaned against the fence, clearly invested in where this conversation was heading. So what changed? What made you realize this now? Linda was quiet for a moment, looking at the pool where I'd been working, then at the equipment area where filter parts were soaking in cleaning solution. I think it was watching someone care about quality work without being asked to. Alex never treats this job like it's beneath him or like I'm bothering him with questions. He sees problems as puzzles to solve, rather than inconveniences to endure. The lawnmower next door started up again, momentarily drowning out our conversation. When it quieted, Linda turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Can I tell you something else, Alex? Something that might sound strange? I nodded, though. Part of me wondered if I was prepared for whatever revelation was coming next. 3 months ago, when you started servicing my pool, I was in the middle of finalizing my divorce. 23 years of marriage ending because we'd both given up trying to actually solve our problems. We'd gotten so used to working around issues instead of addressing them that we forgot what it felt like to have someone genuinely invested in making things better. She paused, watching a leaf drift across the pool's surface. Then you showed up and started explaining water chemistry like it mattered, asking questions about how I used the pool, taking time to understand what I actually needed instead of just following some standard routine. It was such a small thing, but it reminded me that there are people in the world who approach relationships, even professional ones, with real care and attention. Robert was nodding along, clearly relating to some aspect of Linda's story. My wife always says the best relationships are the ones where both people are trying to solve problems together instead of just managing around them. Exactly, Linda said, her voice gaining energy. And that's when I realized I'd never experienced that kind of partnership before. I'd been in relationships where we coexisted, where we tolerated each other's flaws, where we worked around problems instead of through them. But I'd never been with someone who approached our connection the way Alex approaches pool maintenance, with genuine interest in understanding what's really going on and commitment to finding real solutions. The weight of what she was sharing settled over our little group. This wasn't just about failed marriages or pool service. This was about recognizing patterns that had shaped years of Linda's life and finally understanding what she'd been missing. So when I said I finally know what love should feel like, Linda continued, looking directly at me, I meant that watching you work taught me what it looks like when someone truly cares about doing right by another person. Not because they have to, not because they're getting something out of it, but because excellence and respect are just how they approach the world. I stood there holding a dripping filter cartridge, trying to process being part of someone's profound life realization. It was humbling and overwhelming and completely unexpected. This woman had just connected my pool maintenance routine to her understanding of love and partnership. And somehow it didn't feel dramatic or overblown. It felt like truth being spoken by someone who'd finally figured out something important. That's quite a compliment, I said finally, not sure how else to respond to being someone's example of what care and commitment should look like. Linda smiled, the first completely relaxed smile I'd seen from her all morning. It's not a compliment, Alex. It's a recognition. You've been showing me what healthy relationships look like without even knowing it, and I finally understand the difference between settling for adequate and holding out for genuine. The conversation with Robert and Linda had shifted something in the atmosphere of that backyard. What started as a routine pool maintenance call was evolving into something deeper, more connected. After Robert headed back to his yard work, Linda and I fell into a comfortable rhythm of working and talking that felt natural, like we'd been friends for years instead of just customer and service provider. Over the next hour, as I continued cleaning and reassembling the filter system, Linda shared more about her journey, toward understanding what healthy relationships actually looked like. She told me about the slow realization that her marriage had been built on accommodation rather than genuine partnership. How she'd spent years believing that love meant accepting problems instead of working together to solve them. The funny thing is, she said, watching me carefully align the filter housing components, I thought I was being a good wife by not complaining about things that bothered me. I thought patience meant tolerating behavior that actually needed to be addressed. I looked up from my work, interested in where this was heading. What changed your perspective? Linda considered the question while I tightened the housing. Bolts to the manufacturer's specifications. Therapy helped. But honestly, it was watching how you approach problems that really drove the point home. You don't just live with issues. You investigate them, understand them, and fix them properly. It made me realize I'd been living with relationship problems the way some people live with a pool that's never quite clear. The analogy was surprisingly apt. I'd worked on plenty of pools where customers had gotten used to water that was functional, but not optimal, accepting mediocre results because they didn't know how good things could actually be. As I was explaining the importance of proper filter maintenance intervals, Linda's sister Jessica arrived for what was apparently a planned lunch. Jessica was a few years younger than Linda, with the kind of high-energy personality that filled up spaces and made everyone around her feel more animated. She worked as a physical therapist and had that healthcare professional way of noticing details about people's well-being. "So you're the famous pool guy I've been hearing about," Jessica said with a grin, extending her hand for a shake. "Linda's been talking about your work philosophy for weeks now." I wiped my hands clean before shaking hers, curious about what exactly Linda had been sharing. Work philosophy might be giving me too much credit. I just try to fix things properly instead of cutting corners. Jessica laughed, but it was knowing rather than dismissive. "That's exactly what she said you'd say. Linda, tell him about the dating app conversation." Linda's cheeks reddened slightly, but she was smiling. "Jessica's been trying to convince me to try online dating now that my divorce is final. She thinks I need to get back out there and meet people. I keep telling her," Jessica continued, settling into a patio chair with the ease of someone who was clearly a regular presence in Linda's life, that she needs to look for men who approach relationships the way you approach pool maintenance. Thoroughly, professionally, and with genuine interest in long-term success. The idea of my pool service routine being used as dating criteria was both amusing and oddly touching. I'd never thought about the parallels between good maintenance practices and healthy relationship habits. But the more I considered it, the more sense it made. "Have you actually put that in your dating profile?" I asked Linda, genuinely curious. Linda shook her head, laughing. "Not exactly, but Jessica's right that I have a much clearer idea now of what I'm looking for. I want someone who asks questions, who's interested in understanding rather than just reacting, who sees problems as things to solve together rather than obstacles to work around."
Out.
Jessica nodded approvingly. "Plus someone who shows up when they say they will, communicates clearly about what they're doing and why, and takes pride in doing things right, even when no one's watching." The description was flattering, but it also made me think about my own relationship history. I'd been single for about 2 years, partly by choice, and partly because dating had started to feel like a series of interactions, where people were performing rather than genuinely connecting. Hearing Linda and Jessica talk about looking for authenticity and genuine care made me realize I'd been searching for similar qualities without quite knowing how to articulate what I was missing. "Can I ask you something?" said, taking a break from the filter work to join their conversation more fully. "What made you realize these things about relationships? I mean, specifically, what made you connect pool maintenance to partnership dynamics?" Linda exchanged a look with Jessica before answering. "It started small. The first time you worked on the pool, you spent 10 minutes explaining why the pH levels mattered and how different chemicals affected water clarity. My ex-husband would have rolled his eyes and told me I didn't need to understand the details, just trust that it was being handled. But understanding the details helps you maintain things between service calls," I said, which seemed obvious to me but apparently hadn't been obvious to everyone in Linda's life. "Exactly," Jessica said, jumping into the conversation. "Linda called me that night and said she'd just had the strangest realization that her pool guy had shown her more respect in 20 minutes than her husband had shown her in months. He actually wanted her to understand what was happening with her own pool. Linda nodded, looking thoughtful. It was such a small thing, but it made me aware of how many people in my life treated me like I couldn't handle complexity or didn't deserve explanations. Like I should just be grateful that someone was taking care of things without wanting to understand the process. The conversation was interrupted by Max, Linda's golden retriever, who came bounding around the corner of the house with the enthusiasm that only dogs can bring to ordinary moments. Max was clearly a neighborhood favorite, kind of dog who remembered everyone he'd ever met and treated each encounter like a reunion with a long-lost friend. "There's my supervisor," I said, as Max immediately began investigating my tools and the filter components I'd laid out to dry. "He's been overseeing my work here since day one." Jessica laughed as Max attempted to pick up a wrench that was clearly too heavy for him. Linda got Max right after she separated from David. She said she wanted to live with someone who was genuinely excited to see her every day, and who doesn't pretend to listen while actually thinking about something else, Linda added, scratching Max behind the ears. "Dogs are honest about their attention. When Max is with you, he's really with you." The simplicity of that observation hit me unexpectedly. How many relationships had I been in where people were physically present but mentally elsewhere? How often had I been guilty of the same thing? As I was pondering this, Carlos Martinez appeared at the backyard gate. Carlos was another regular customer who lived a few streets over, and he'd gotten into the habit of stopping by other jobs to chat about pool maintenance tips or to refer friends who needed service. He was a retired firefighter with a practical approach to problem solving that I appreciated. "Alex, perfect timing," Carlos called out. "I was hoping to catch you. My neighbor's been asking about getting their pool serviced, and I told them they needed to meet you first." "Why's that?" Linda asked, clearly curious about what Carlos might have said. Carlos grinned, settling into the conversation like he belonged there. "Because Alex doesn't just maintain pools, he educates customers. Half the pool guys I've dealt with over the years wanted to keep everything mysterious, so you'd have to keep calling them. Alex actually wants your pool to work better." "That's interesting," Jessica said. "We were just talking about how rare it is to find service providers who genuinely want to help you succeed rather than just creating dependency." Carlos nodded enthusiastically. "Exactly. Alex taught me how to read my own water chemistry, how to spot problems early, how to maintain my equipment between visits. Most contractors would consider that bad for business. But Alex seems to think happy, educated customers are better than confused, dependent ones." The conversation was making me realize that my approach to customer service wasn't as common as I'd assumed. I'd always thought that helping people understand their pool systems was just good practice. But apparently it was distinctive enough that customers talked about it with each other. "Can I tell you all something?" Linda said, her voice taking on that serious tone I was beginning to recognize. This whole conversation is exactly what I meant about finally understanding what love should feel like. Look at how we're all talking, really listening to each other, building on each other's ideas, sharing experiences that might help someone else. She gestured around the group that had naturally formed in her backyard. 6 months ago, I thought relationships were about finding someone who could tolerate your problems and whose problems you could tolerate in return. But this is what partnership actually looks like. People who are genuinely interested in understanding each other and helping each other succeed. Carlos looked thoughtful. "My wife and I have been married 32 years, and I think you're onto something important. The best parts of our relationship have always been when we approach challenges like teammates rather than just two people who happen to live in the same house." Jessica was nodding along. "That's what I keep trying to tell Linda about dating. Don't look for someone who won't cause problems. Look for someone who's interested in solving problems together." The pool filter system was nearly reassembled at this point, but I found myself reluctant to finish the job and break up this unexpected gathering. There was something special happening in Linda's backyard, a kind of authentic connection that felt rare and valuable. "You know what's funny?" said, making final adjustments to the filter housing. "I became a pool guy, partly because I wanted to work alone, avoid office politics and complicated relationships. But the best part of this job has turned out too. Be the connections with customers like all of you." Linda smiled. watching me complete the filter installation with the kind of attention she'd been giving my work since our first meeting. Maybe that's because you approach customer relationships the same way you approach pool maintenance, with genuine interest in doing right by people rather than just getting through the interaction. As I started the pool system back up and checked the circulation, the clarity of the water was already noticeably improved. The jets were running at full strength. The skimmer was pulling efficiently. Everything was working the way it was designed to work. "There's your real circulation back," I said, feeling the satisfaction that came with solving a problem properly. "This should stay clear and balanced as long as you maintain the cleaning schedule we discussed." Carlos leaned over to examine the running system. "Look at that flow rate. That's what proper maintenance looks like." Jessica was watching the interaction with obvious interest. "And that's what proper relationship maintenance looks like too. Clear communication, consistent attention, and genuine investment in long-term success." Linda looked around at the group of people who had somehow assembled in her backyard, then at her pool running better than it had in months, then at me packing up tools that had solved a problem she'd been living with for too long. "Alex," she said, "I have a question for you, and I want you to think about it seriously." The tone of her voice suggested this wasn't going to be a simple question about pool chemistry or maintenance schedules. Part 4. Climax and community convergence. Linda's question hung in the air like morning mist over the pool surface. The way she'd asked me to think seriously about whatever she was going to say next made my stomach tighten with anticipation. Carlos, Jessica, and even Max seemed to sense that something significant was about to happen, because the backyard had gone unusually quiet, except for the sound of the newly functioning pool jets. "Would you consider staying for Emma's birthday party this weekend?" Linda asked, her voice steady but carrying an undercurrent of vulnerability I hadn't heard before. Not as the pool guy, but as a friend. As someone who's become part of this little community we seem to be building here. The invitation caught me completely off guard. I'd been expecting another profound observation about relationships, or maybe a philosophical question about work and purpose. Instead, she was asking me to step out of my professional role and into something more personal. Jessica was grinning, like she'd been hoping for exactly this development. Carlos nodded approvingly, as if Linda had just made a smart tactical decision. Max wagged his tail, apparently voting in favor of any plan that involved more people gathering in his backyard. "I don't want to intrude on a family celebration," I said carefully, though the truth was that the invitation appealed to me more than I wanted to admit. When was the last time I'd been invited to something just because someone enjoyed my company, rather than needed my services? "You wouldn't be intruding," Linda said firmly. "Emma's been asking about you since she saw you working here last week. She wants to thank the person who's going to make sure her pool party isn't a disaster. Plus, I think you genuinely enjoy meeting some of our friends and neighbors." Carlos jumped in before I could respond. "Alex, you should definitely come. Linda throws the best neighborhood gatherings. Good food, interesting people, and usually at least one story worth remembering." Last year, Jessica added, we had this whole discussion about whether happiness comes from achieving goals or from appreciating what you already have. It started because someone asked about the best part of retirement and ended up being this. Amazing conversation about life satisfaction and community connections. The idea of spending a weekend afternoon with people who engaged in that kind of meaningful dialogue was undeniably attractive. Most of my social interactions lately had been either work-related or superficial encounters at the grocery store or gym. When had I last been part of a gathering where people actually talked about ideas that mattered? "What time does it start?" I asked, surprising myself by how quickly I'd moved from hesitation to acceptance. Linda's face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Around noon on Saturday. It's supposed to be a pool party, but knowing our crowd, we'll probably end up talking as much as swimming. Emma's friends will provide the actual teenage energy while the adults pretend we're still young enough to keep up with them. Should I bring anything?" I asked, already mentally reviewing my weekend schedule to make sure I could rearrange other commitments. "Just yourself," Jessica said. "And maybe some of those interesting stories about unusual pool problems you've solved. Linda says you've got some good ones." As I finished packing up my tools, the conversation naturally evolved into planning details for Saturday. Linda mentioned that Robert would probably wander over at some point since he had a standing invitation. to anything happening in her backyard. Carlos said he might stop by if his wife's book club meeting ended early enough. Even the mailman, apparently, had been known to linger for conversations when Linda was hosting outdoor gatherings. "Your house seems to be a natural gathering place," I observed, loading the last of my equipment into the van. Linda looked around her backyard with obvious affection. "It wasn't always like this. For most of my marriage, this was just a backyard, with a pool that never worked quite right. But something changed after the divorce, when I started actually taking care of this place the way it deserved to be taken care of." "You mean the pool maintenance?" I asked.
What?
"I mean everything," Linda replied. "The pool, the garden, the relationships, even my relationship with myself. Once I started expecting things to actually work properly instead of just accepting whatever level of dysfunction felt normal, everything got better." Jessica was nodding along with obvious pride in her sister's transformation. "You should have seen this place 2 years ago. The pool was green half the time, the garden was overgrown, and Linda was convinced that having standards was somehow selfish or unrealistic." "What changed?" Carlos asked, genuinely curious. Linda considered the question while we all stood around the pool that was now running at optimal efficiency. "I think it started with small things. Hiring a pool service that actually cared about results instead of just going through motions. Planting flowers that I actually wanted to look at instead of whatever was easiest to maintain. Choosing friends who added energy to my life instead of just people who needed things from me." The pattern she was describing resonated with my own experience of building a business based on quality rather than convenience. It's harder to do things right, but the results speak for themselves in ways that create sustainable satisfaction rather than constant stress. "And now look," Jessica said, gesturing around the backyard where we'd all naturally gathered for meaningful conversation. "This place has become the kind of space where people want to spend time, where interesting things happen, where real connections develop." As if summoned by our discussion of community connections, Emma appeared at the back door. At 16, she had that perfect combination of teenage confidence and genuine curiosity that made adults remember why they enjoyed talking to young people. She'd been in and out of the house during my previous visits, usually focused on school or friends, but always polite and interested in whatever project was happening in her backyard. "Mom, are you planning my birthday party without me?" Emma asked with mock indignation, walking over to check out the newly functioning pool system. "Just making sure Alex knows he's invited," Linda replied. "He's the reason your pool is going to be perfect for Saturday." Emma turned to me with a smile that was clearly inherited from her mother. "You're coming to my party? That's awesome. Most of my friends think it's weird that I actually know our pool guy's name, but I told them you're more like a friend who happens to fix pools." The casual way she'd repositioned our professional relationship into something more personal touched me unexpectedly. When had I become someone that a 16-year-old considered a friend rather than just a service provider? "I'm looking forward to it," I said, and realized I genuinely meant it. 16's a big birthday. It's the last one before I can drive myself places, Emma said with obvious excitement. "Mom says next year I won't need her to take me to friends' houses anymore, which means she'll probably have to find new ways to check up on what I'm doing." Linda laughed. "I prefer to think of it as staying connected rather than checking up." "Same thing," Emma said, but with obvious affection. "Alex, can I ask you something about pool maintenance? I want to understand how everything works so I can help take care of it when Mom's not around." The request surprised me. Most teenagers showed zero interest in household maintenance responsibilities, but Emma seemed genuinely curious about understanding rather than just avoiding responsibility. "Of course," I said, walking back toward the equipment area. "What do you want to know?" For the next 20 minutes, Emma asked detailed questions about water chemistry, equipment maintenance, and troubleshooting common problems. She took notes. On her phone, asked for clarification when something wasn't clear, and generally approached the information with the kind of serious attention that suggested she saw this as valuable knowledge rather than just another chore. Jessica watched this interaction with obvious interest. "Emma's always been good at seeing the bigger picture," she said to Linda. "She understands that taking care of things properly actually makes life easier in the long run. Unlike her mother at that age," Linda said with self-deprecating humor. I thought responsibility was something that just happened to you rather than something you actively chose. Carlos, who had been listening to Emma's questions, jumped into the conversation. You know what I like about this whole discussion? 3 generations of people who understand that quality maintenance is an investment rather than an expense. What do you mean? Emma asked. Carlos gestured toward the pool equipment. Your mom could have kept hiring cheap pool service that just treated symptoms and never solved underlying problems. Instead, she invested in someone who actually fixes things properly, which means fewer problems, lower long-term costs, and better results. Plus, I added, when you understand how your systems work, you can spot problems early instead of waiting until they become expensive emergencies. Emma nodded thoughtfully. Like preventive maintenance instead of crisis management. Exactly, Linda said, looking at her daughter with obvious pride. That's a lesson that applies to a lot more than just pool maintenance. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of a car pulling into the driveway, followed by voices and laughter that suggested more people were arriving. Through the side gate came Robert, accompanied by his wife Maria, whom I'd met briefly during previous visits but hadn't had much chance to talk with. We heard there was a community gathering happening back here, Maria said with a warm smile. Robert said Alex had the pool running better than ever, and we wanted to see the results. Plus, Robert added, Maria's been wanting to ask you about our pool maintenance situation. Our current guy is adequate, but after listening to me talk about your approach to problem solving, she thinks we might want to make a change. As more people gathered around the pool to examine the improved circulation and discuss various maintenance philosophies, I found myself at the center of an impromptu neighborhood consultation session. Questions ranged from technical issues to service provider recommendations to broader discussions about the value of investing in quality rather than just accepting whatever seemed convenient. What struck me most was how naturally this group of people connected with each other. There wasn't the usual social awkwardness of forced networking or the superficial politeness of casual acquaintances. Everyone seemed genuinely interested in each other's experiences and willing to share useful information without expecting anything in return. This is exactly what I was talking about earlier, Linda said during a brief lull in the various conversations. This is what healthy community looks like. People who actually care about helping each other succeed rather than just coexisting in the same neighborhood. Emma was standing next to me, still taking notes about pool maintenance, but also clearly absorbing the broader lesson about building genuine connections with people. Is this how your other customers are? She asked. Like, do all your pool jobs turn into community events? I laughed, considering the question seriously. Not all of them, but the best ones do. There's something about taking care of shared spaces that brings out people's collaborative instincts. Or maybe, Jessica suggested, it's about finding people who approach relationships the same way. Alex approaches pool maintenance with genuine interest in long-term success rather than just getting through today's problems. As the afternoon progressed and our impromptu gathering continued, I realized that Linda's earlier observation about finally understanding what love should feel like had expanded into something even more significant. This wasn't just about romantic relationships or even individual connections. This was about discovering what authentic community could look like when people approached each other with the same care and attention they brought to maintaining things they valued. Saturday's birthday party was going to be more than just a celebration of Emma turning 16. It was going to be a celebration of the kind of connections that develop when people choose to invest in each other's success rather than just managing around each other's limitations. Part 5. Resolution and meaning revelation. Saturday arrived. With perfect pool party weather, sunny skies, gentle breeze, and temperatures that made jumping into clear water sound like the best possible way to spend an afternoon. I showed up at Linda's house around noon, carrying a cooler with drinks and feeling that particular combination of nervousness and excitement that comes with stepping into a social situation where you're not quite sure what role you're supposed to play. The backyard was already alive with activity. Emma and her friends had claimed the pool area, bringing that infectious teenage energy that makes adults remember what it felt like to be young enough to believe anything was possible. Linda was orchestrating food preparation with the kind of calm efficiency that suggested she'd done this many times before. While Jessica helped coordinate logistics and offered commentary on everything from music selection to sunscreen application, what struck me immediately was how naturally I fit into this gathering. There was no awkward introduction period or careful navigation of social hierarchies. People just welcomed me as part of whatever was happening, asking about my drive over, offering food and drinks, and including me in ongoing conversations as if I'd been attending these events for years. Robert and Maria had arrived early and were deep in conversation with Carlos about neighborhood development projects. Emma's friends were curious about pool maintenance, in the way that 16-year-olds are curious about anything that involves technical knowledge they might need someday. Even Max seemed to sense that this was a special occasion, wearing a birthday bandana and supervising activities with increased intensity. "Alex," Emma called out from the pool where she was floating with two friends. "Come settle an argument. Chloe thinks chlorine is bad for your hair. But I told her proper water chemistry actually protects your hair better than swimming in untreated water." I walked over to the pool edge, impressed that Emma had retained and applied information from our previous conversations. Emma's right. Balanced water chemistry is actually gentler on hair and skin than water that's too acidic or too alkaline. "See," Emma said triumphantly. "I told you Alex would back me up. He doesn't just maintain pools. He educates people about how water chemistry actually works." Chloe, apparently not entirely convinced, asked follow-up questions that led to an impromptu lesson about pH levels, sanitizer effectiveness, and the relationship between water balance and swimmer comfort. Before long, several adults had gathered around to listen, and what started as a simple question had evolved into the kind of educational discussion that somehow felt both informative and entertaining. "This is what I love about Alex," Linda said to the group. "He makes complex things understandable without talking down to people, whether you're 16 or 60. He explains things in a way that actually helps you learn, instead of just showing off how much he knows." The observation prompted Maria to share a story about a contractor who had recently worked on their kitchen renovation. "He kept using technical jargon and making us feel stupid for asking questions," she said. "Alex is the complete opposite. He wants you to understand what's happening and why. That's because Alex approaches customer service like a teacher, rather than just a service provider," Jessica added. "He's genuinely invested in helping people succeed rather than creating dependency." As the afternoon progressed, I found myself moving naturally between different groups and conversations. Sometimes I was explaining pool equipment to curious teenagers, sometimes discussing business philosophy with other adults, and sometimes just enjoying the kind of relaxed social interaction that reminded me why human connection matters so much. The turning point came when Linda called for everyone's attention to make a toast for Emma's birthday. We all gathered around the pool area, adults holding drinks and teenagers clutching sodas, while Linda stood next to her daughter with obvious pride and affection. 16 years ago," Linda began, "I thought I knew what it meant to create a good life for my family. I thought it was about providing stability, avoiding conflict, and making sure everyone's basic needs were met. I thought love meant accepting whatever level of connection felt normal, even if it wasn't particularly fulfilling." Emma was listening with the kind of attention that suggested she'd heard pieces of this story before, but was interested in how her mother would tell it to this particular audience. "But this year," Linda continued, "I've learned that real love, whether it's romantic love, family love, or community love, isn't about accepting adequate. It's about caring enough to invest in making things actually work well." She gestured toward me, and I felt that familiar heat in my cheeks that came with being used as an example. "Alex showed up in our backyard 3 months ago to fix a pool filter, but he ended up teaching me what healthy relationships actually look like. Not because he was trying to be a relationship guru, but because he approaches everything he does with genuine care and commitment to excellence." The group was listening with obvious interest, and I could see several people nodding. Along with Linda's observations, watching Alex work made me realize that I'd spent most of my adult life accepting problems instead of solving them, tolerating dysfunction instead of addressing it, and calling that acceptance love when it was really just fear of demanding better. Emma reached over and squeezed her mother's hand, clearly proud of the growth and self-awareness Linda was sharing. "So my toast today," Linda said, raising her glasses to Emma, who's growing up in a world where she'll have examples of what healthy relationships look like, and to Alex, who reminded all of us that caring about quality and investing in long-term success isn't selfish. It's how you build something worth celebrating. The toast was met with enthusiastic agreement from everyone gathered. As people drank and conversations resumed, I found myself overwhelmed by the significance of what Linda had shared. She'd taken a simple pool maintenance relationship and transformed it into a lesson about love, community, and the courage to expect excellence from the people and situations in our lives. Carlos came over and clapped me on the shoulder. It was quite a tribute, he said. "Have you ever thought about how your approach to work affects people beyond just getting their pools clean?" The question made me consider something I'd never really examined before. "Not really," I admitted. "I just try to do good work and treat people with respect." I didn't realize that was particularly unusual. "Maybe that's why it's so powerful," Maria suggested, joining our conversation. "You're not performing care or professionalism, you're just genuinely committed to doing right by people." As the party continued into the evening, I watched Emma interact with her friends and family, clearly absorbing lessons about building authentic connections and maintaining high standards for how people treat each other. She was growing up with examples of adults who chose to invest in quality relationships rather than just accepting whatever level of connection felt convenient. Robert approached me as I was helping clean up, carrying empty plates toward the kitchen. Linda told me about her realization regarding love and relationships. He said, "She's not wrong about the connection to how you approach your work." "What do you mean?" I asked. "You show up consistently, you communicate clearly about what you're doing and why. You're genuinely interested in long-term success rather than short-term fixes. And you treat people's concerns with respect even when they seem minor to you," Robert explained. "Those are exactly the qualities that make relationships work." As the evening wound down and guests began heading home, Linda walked me to my van, carrying a plate of leftover birthday cake and wearing the kind of satisfied expression that comes from hosting a successful celebration. "Thank you for coming today," she said. "And thank you for being the kind of person who helped me understand what I'd been missing in my relationships." "Thank you for inviting me," I replied, "for helping me understand that good work is about more than just technical competence. It's about genuinely caring about the people you serve." Alinda smiled, looking back at her house where lights were still on, and Emma was probably telling her friends about the amazing pool party they'd just experienced. "You know what the best part is?" she said. "Emma's growing up with examples of what healthy relationships look like. She'll never have to spend 20 years accepting mediocre treatment, because she'll know what genuine care and respect actually feel like." As I drove home that night, I thought about Linda's words and the unexpected community that had formed around a simple pool maintenance relationship. She was right about finally understanding what love should feel like, not just romantic love, but the broader love of treating people with genuine care, investing in long-term success, and building connections based on mutual respect rather than just convenience. The pool filter repair had taught us both something profound about the difference between accepting problems and solving them, between tolerating dysfunction and creating something that actually works well. Most importantly, it had shown us that real connection happens when people approach each other with the same care and attention they bring to maintaining things they truly value. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.